guys are even for you. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I'm Attorney General Kris Kobach, and behind me we have attorneys from my office as well as some plaintiffs in our case and their attorney from the Alliance Defending Freedom. And I want to just, I'll take your questions, but I'll just give you a short overview of this lawsuit. Today, the state of Kansas, along with the states of Wyoming, Utah, and Alaska, as well as private plaintiffs, Moms for Liberty, Young America's Foundation, and Female Athletes United, of which we have 2 members here today, filed a lawsuit in federal district court for the District of Kansas, challenging the Biden administration's new regulation, or as it's called in federal parlance, a new rule, which purports to interpret Title IX of federal statute. And essentially, in a one-sentence summary, it basically says that treating individuals by their biological sex rather than their chosen gender identity now violates Title IX, is discriminatory, and can cause an educational institution to lose a huge amount of federal funding. In our civil complaint, which you should, if you don't have a copy of it already, it was filed within the last hour, we can get you a copy or get you a link to a copy. Our civil complaint is more than 75 pages long, and it goes into all of the legal violations of this new regulation, explaining why it's unlawful. To give you a quick summary, first of all, the regulation is contrary to it's contrary to the text of the statute itself, which is the Title IX statute. And no regulation can go outside of the 4 corners set by the statute that creates the agency or creates the area of regulatory authority. Second, it violates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Third, it violates the Administrative Procedure Act. Fourth, it violates the First Amendment rights of free speech and religious free exercise. Fifth, it violates the constitutional separation of powers between the legislative and executive branches. Sixth, it violates Article 1 of the Constitution, exceeding Congress's spending power. And seventh and finally, it violates the 10th Amendment. And those are just the legal problems with this regulation. I think what more people are probably interested in are the actual practical problems and the consequences it has for people all across the state of Kansas, indeed all across the United States. The one that people probably have heard the most about, and this is the first problem with this regulation, is that it will effectively destroy women's sports over time. And the regulation will also overrule the Kansas statute that was passed in this building in 2023 to protect women's and girls' sports in Kansas from intrusion and competition by biological male competitors. This is already happening across the country. It's happening in track and field, swimming, weightlifting, volleyball, cycling, and recently in Kansas, even in wrestling, if you can believe it. Now, it's obvious to anyone who knows anything about sports that this is unfair. It denies girls of an opportunity to win awards, to win scholarships, and in some sports, it endangers the girls. Those reasons alone are enough to file this lawsuit to stop this Biden regulation. But there are other things that it does as well. And those I want to briefly highlight for you. Again, the complaint goes into much greater detail, but there are some other practical effects that this regulation will have, and you may not notice because, again, most of the coverage of this regulation has been on sports. The second thing it does is it provides support for abortions. Under Biden's Title IX rule, schools must provide leave and disability services for those who seek abortions or risk losing federal funding, and this is in spite of the fact that the text of Title IX itself says that it must be neutral with respect to abortion. A third effect it will have is it will create a sexual harassment and free speech nightmare. The regulation poses real due process problems on college campuses related to sexual harassment accusations. And it will affect all college students, not just the athletes, because it requires educational institutions to adopt grievance procedures for administering their sexual harassment rules. And these grievance procedures will now have to change completely because of the transgender element that is forced into what we all, I think, generally now understand as sexual harassment, it's going to become an impossible legal thicket to define who is harassing whom and exactly what constitutes sexual harassment. Students who believe they've been discriminated against or have been exposed to a hostile environment on their college campus because of the pronouns that other students are using will have the ability to they will institute a procedure to seek a penalty against the offending student, the offending teacher, the offending professor, the offending staff member who has used the wrong pronoun or has said something that they feel insults them or harasses them in some way. And if the school doesn't respond by penalizing or expelling that student, then the school risks losing Title IX funds. It is an extraordinary morass of accusations and penalties on college campus that we are going to see if this rule takes effect. Another effect it has is it violates the free exercise of religion. If this rule takes effect, it will mean that many people who have a faith-based objection to recognizing that someone who claims to have changed sex has changed sex or gender, if one has a religious objection to that and would prefer not to endorse that through their own speech, they will be compelled to speak against their religious beliefs and face penalties if they refuse to speak against their religious, if they refuse to use this speech that is in violation of their own religious beliefs. Another effect, it endangers girls. If the Biden regulation takes effect, a 16-year-old female high school student on an overnight field trip could be forced to share a hotel room with a biological male who identifies as a girl, or the district might risk losing federal funding. This is also something that is not hypothetical. This is something that has already arisen prior to this rule as schools start grappling with the question of whether transgendered individuals have to be treated in all respects as the sex that they purport to adopt. There are other consequences. A 14-year-old girl could be forced to share a locker room and to disrobe and change clothes and shower in the same locker room with an 18-year-old male who identifies as a woman. Or again, the school district could lose Title IX funds. These are all horrible ideas, but in theory, if Congress wanted to change the law, wanted to amend Title IX, and somehow found a way to protect the privacy rights and the First Amendment rights and the free exercise First Amendment rights of individuals and respected the Constitution, Congress, in theory, could change Title IX. But Congress didn't, and Congress won't. And we all know that Congress never would, because it would never come close to getting a majority vote in either House of Congress. So instead, the Biden administration has decided to do yet another end run around Congress and have its administrative agency change Title IX by reinterpreting Title IX and imposing new regulations consistent with that reinterpretation. And that's why it is, in addition to all of the other problems, it's an injustice to us as Americans. We have elected representatives in Congress who are supposed to represent us on important issues like this. Changes like this should never be done through administrative agencies, and it is unconstitutional for them to be done through administrative agencies, and we will argue that point in court. In conclusion, most Kansans know the difference between a man and a woman, but Biden's Title IX regulation effectively requires universities to pretend that there are no biological differences between men and women and effectively erases those differences. It's unconscionable, it's unfair in the athletic arenas, and it's dangerous for girls and women. But for the purposes of this lawsuit, it also violates the law, and therefore we are confident will be held to be illegal. So we look forward to seeing the president's attorneys in court. And before I take some questions, we'll have a couple of statements from some girls who attended my high school alma mater, Washburn Rural, and they have a few things to say.
Hello everyone, my name is Aubrey Simpson and I'm a senior at Washburn Rural High School. In high school, I competed in softball, wrestling, powerlifting, volleyball, and track and field. Next year, I will be playing volleyball at Mid-American Nazarene University on a scholarship. I want to thank Attorney General Kris Kobach for inviting me to speak here today and for trying to protect female athletes just like me. I've been playing sports ever since I could walk, and both my parents were athletes. My mom played volleyball in college as well. I've sacrificed a lot playing sports, including my time with practice almost every single day, my body with 4 head stitches to broken ribs, and a major elbow injury in wrestling that deterred my softball season as well. But Title IX has given me the opportunity to make these sacrifices worthwhile. I have worked incredibly hard to earn a scholarship and be the best I can be in sports. But now, some officials in Washington are threatening to erase all of that. Because these new Title IX changes, I may be forced to compete against boys who are bigger and faster and stronger than I am. I may have to share locker rooms, restrooms, and even shower areas or changing rooms with them. I am standing up for myself, my little sister, and all the girls like us who want to preserve the original meaning of Title IX. I do not want any girl to lose their opportunity to compete on a level playing field and lose their safety space to change. Politicians in Washington are pushing an agenda that hurts girls and takes away our right to fairness and privacy. That is wrong. I am so grateful for those who are standing against these rule changes, and I hope more will join us, and because women do matter.
Hello, my name is Avalon Simpson, and I play volleyball at Washburn Rural Middle School in Topeka, Kansas. My parents and my older sister have inspired me in a lot of ways in sports, and when I saw my sister running around in the bases at softball, I knew I wanted to be just like her. So when I was 4 years old, I started playing softball, and it's my dream to one day play in college. Sports have taught me so much. I've learned about teamwork and communication. Pretty quickly, I also learned that the boys in my school are bigger and stronger than me. And it became clear to me that it wouldn't be fair if I or other girls had to compete against boys in women's sports. I thought this was pretty obvious to everyone, but I guess it wasn't obvious to some people in Washington, D.C. Last week, some of those people changed some rules that changed my right to fair competition. Now, when I play softball or volleyball, I could be forced to play against these stronger boys. And now boys can access my restrooms, locker rooms, and even hotel rooms on overnight school trips. That is not right. I do not want to have to change and shower in front of boys in the locker room. I'm thankful for officials like Attorney General Kris Kobach, who are taking a stand for girls like me. But I hope that others will listen to voices like mine and my sister's. Title IX matters, and so does women's sports. We should be trying to protect women's rights to fair competition, not making it harder for women to compete and win.
With that, I will be happy to take any questions, and if you have questions for the young ladies, they might be able to ask, or their attorney, or I might be able to answer the questions as well.
Mr. Kobach, I feel like a lot of people would argue that politics don't even belong in sports, so why is there the feel of need to take action on something like this and not just let the NCAA handle it?
Well, because the NCAA doesn't govern all sports. The NAIA, as you may know, just recently effectively banned transgender athletes from participating in women's events. And so I certainly hope that the NCAA will recognize biological reality and recognize the obvious reality of fairness in sports and ban transgender athletes from participating in the women's divisions. And there's a good argument in terms of safety for banning biological females from participating in the men's divisions. But we're talking about high schools here too. But to your original point, yeah, I think sports should be free of politics. We're not injecting politics into sports. We're keeping politics out because it is a pure political, ideological crusade that is driving this attempt to change women's sports. None of the athletes in women's sports, none of the biological females competing in women's sports, or the coaches said, oh, we need transgender males to be in these events for them to be fair. No, on the contrary, when transgender males entered these sports, it became unfair. And as a dad of an athlete who's now going to be, my second daughter is going to be competing on the Hillsdale track and field and cross-country teams in the fall, I don't ever want to see her losing a race or placing one place lower or two places lower in a race because a biological male ran faster. It would not be surprising at all if a biological male ran faster. But the notion that we're even talking about whether it's unfair or right to have biological males participating in women's sports is itself just mind-blowing. Anyone who has a daughter participating in sports, anyone who has participated in sports themselves, anyone who believes sports should be fair, which I would hope would be all Americans, would recognize that this Biden administration rule is just wrong.
You can go over there, Jack.
Okay.
I believe it was a DOE official that said this rule change doesn't apply to athletics.
So the rule change affects all college activities, and the rule change uses sweeping language, in part because they don't want to highlight the effect that it will have on athletics. But there's no question, if you read it, and I think virtually any lawyer who read it would say, yeah, this has to affect athletic activities because those are the school activities.
And you said it's about protection in mind. Are you looking at other policies to make women's sports more equitable in the state besides this focus on this lawsuit?
Well, so we're essentially defending the status quo. So the Office of the Attorney General, has limited ability to propose new policies. We can certainly propose to the Kansas legislature statutes that we think should be enacted, but we don't really have the ability to propose new bills in Congress. So, what we're doing is playing the role of an attorney defending the civil rights of Kansans and defending Kansas's statute. Of course, the legislators in this building spent a long time deliberating over the statute that was passed in 2023, a very good statute protecting women's sports. And so, I'm also protecting the right of states, and that's why there's a 10th Amendment issue here too, the right of states to legislate in this area. And so we're acting defensively to stop this intrusion, which is unlawful, from the Biden administration.
And you're hearing from advocates right now that stuff like this and studies have shown that policies like these do affect the mental health of transgender students. What do you feel the state's responsibility is to these students?
Well, the state's responsibility is not to cater to a claim about a person's mental health and change all of high school and college athletics to appease or to somehow provide relief for that claim. Athletics is one of the world's greatest forums for humans to compete and to excel and to achieve. And, lots of Americans might feel unhappy that they aren't able to participate in a particular sport because maybe they aren't tall enough or strong enough or fast enough to participate in that sport. But hopefully people can all find a sport that they can participate in and that they do enjoy and that they may be competitive in. But the idea that we should destroy women's sports all in the name of appeasing someone's feelings, I think is wrong, and I think most Americans would agree that it's wrong.
When the original Title IX legislation was passed, obviously that itself represented a major change to athletics in college.
Yeah.
And you said that you believe politics should, stay out of sports.
Right.
Was that initial law keeping politics out of sports? Is the entire Title IX statute, undue legislative influence on sports and colleges in general?
Well, I don't think so, because the Title IX statute, as you may recall, was designed to ensure that this massive amount of money that when it first came in, the Title IX statute, it was principally looking at college sports, and as we all know, there is a huge amount of money in college sports now, more than there was back then. But there is, there's public support, there's taxpayer support for these sports, and the idea was that, and I think it's a perfectly fine idea, it was very limited intrusion of the law into college sports, simply to say, look, if you're going to provide all of these opportunities for men at college, you need to provide similar opportunities for women at college, because these are public dollars being spent, and these dollars shouldn't be spent in an unequal way. And I think that certainly was fair. But no one in the initial Title IX statute, believed that it would someday be used to effectively make women's sports unfair by allowing biological males to come in. And so it's really an insult to the members of Congress and to our country, which I think most of us today would say Title IX has been a great accomplishment. women's sports, especially women's collegiate sports where there's the opportunity for scholarships. They are a vibrant arena of athletic ability, opportunity, and achievement, and we risk destroying all of that with this new regulation, and that's why we're opposing it.
You brought up that it would create a sexual harassment nightmare. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that sexual harassment towards who?
Yeah, so our complaint goes into great detail on this, but suffice it to say that if you create a hostile environment where people are sexually harassed at college, then there are grievance procedures in the status quo that colleges are supposed to have to address those harassment, the incidents of harassment. But if it becomes harassment for one person to use a pronoun in addressing another person, which may very well be the result of this regulation as we read it, then you are creating a situation where students or faculty members are behaving in a way that they think is perfectly acceptable and certainly doesn't hurt an individual in any physical or serious way, but merely reflects their beliefs, and that could be cause for harassment and the person being expelled from the school. And we also know that schools may overreact in their desire to protect their access to Title IX funds. And so the standards of sexual harassment could change dramatically at universities.
It seems like this would clash with their state laws that are like bathroom bills, and it seems like universities now have to choose either to break state law or forego their Title IX funding. I just kind of want to get a better sense of how these funds.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because if this rule goes into effect, then you will have a federal regulation telling the school to do one thing, and then in 20 or so states, you'll have state law telling the school to do another thing. Now, we want to avoid that situation, and we talk about this in our complaint. If that situation were to arise, it raises a very important constitutional question, and that is the supremacy clause or preemption. Under our Constitution, it is possible for Congress to override or trump a state law and say, no, this is now federal law, here's the way we're doing it all across the country. But Article 6 of our Constitution only gives the power to Congress to override state law. Congress isn't doing this. This is an unelected group of bureaucrats acting under President Biden's orders that is doing this. They have no constitutional authority to override state law. And hopefully we don't get to a situation where this regulation goes into effect and suddenly schools and universities are being told one thing by our federal regulatory agency, and with the very heavy penalty of loss of federal dollars hanging over their head, and then being told another thing by state law.
Is there a timeline for when it would take effect, or is it just going to be stopped because of the lawsuits, or could you kind of explain how that process works?
Sure. I think the intention of the Biden administration is for this to be in effect in the fall and in the coming school year. The intention of our lawsuit, and there are several other lawsuits that have been filed, is to get a preliminary injunction in place before that time. Usually a federal district court can issue a preliminary injunction relatively quickly, within a few months in most cases, and in particularly urgent cases, a court can sometimes expedite things and do it within a few weeks.
Have you heard from any schools in Kansas, both at high school, middle school level, but also at the college level, that have concerns about these regulations?
Yes, I have heard from individuals at a high school in northeast Kansas where the issue of boys and girls traveling to events and sharing rooms at school events, wondering how that's going to go in the future. That particular school already had a situation where a trans individual wanted to travel and be housed with the girls' team. We've also heard from, in the wrestling context in Kansas, there's already been athletic events where a biological male individual has been wrestling in the female divisions. And so these issues are already coming up. And then I've had questions from at least one school board member, there may be several. I've had a lot of conversations about this, asking, when does this happen? What do we do? And my advice has been to wait, don't change anything until we know whether these rules actually go into effect. And my belief is that we will prevail, or one of the other states, there are a couple of other state lawsuits, actually there are 6 other state lawsuits around the country. I believe one of us will get a preliminary injunction in effect and hopefully be nationwide.
A lot of athletes may feel the same way, but they're not up here standing with the general here. Why do you feel it's important for you two to be here?
Either of you want to speak? Okay, go ahead. Rachel's their attorney, Rachel
Yes, I'm
Rufo.
their attorney. Yeah.
Say your name there.
Yes, my name is Rachel Rouleau, and I'm legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. Aubrey and Avalon have had the ability to compete on a fair playing field throughout all of high school, and they have gotten to do that because, like Attorney General Kobach just said, Kansas has a law in place that protects women's sports, and so it's very important for them to stand up. They felt it was important because they're going to continue to compete in athletics. Aubrey's going to compete in college, and Avalon's going to continue in high school, and they want to ensure that they have an equal playing field, and also they are safe in their locker rooms and their restrooms and overnight accommodations when they go on overnight trips. So it's really important for them that they wanted to stand up, and they want to get more women to stand up with them.
And I would just ask, we've seen a couple of lawsuits about, in general, just trans issues, and some of the trans families I've talked to in the state, they say issues like this and lawsuits like this and the gender marker bans are kind of making them move out of state or discouraging them from staying in the state. Have you seen that sort of response from other people? Or are you worried about that?
I have not seen that response in terms of individuals saying we're leaving Kansas, or really this effort to push back against these Title IX regulations is a multi-state effort with more than 20 states saying through their Attorney General, we're going to try to stop this. I think the legislators have assessed the views of the people of Kansas, and ultimately it was the legislators who did what I think was the right thing and passed a bill last year that protects women's sports. They also passed SB 180 last year, which says that in effect that driver's licenses and birth certificates shall reflect biological sex at birth. It also says, by the way, that school districts, and it mentions school districts specifically in Section C of the Act, it said that school districts, when they list students and recognize students, that they should list and recognize them by their biological sex at birth. So that was a decision made by the legislators of Kansas that reflects the opinion of the people of Kansas. And I think legislators in other states made the same calculation. That's their job, to represent the people of Kansas, and I think they're doing it well with respect to that bill.
And Dr. Kelly, we asked about this, and she said that, to kind of quote, she said that she wished we'd be focusing more on issues that matter to everyday Kansans. Would you say this is an issue that impacts everyone's lives? Or?
Absolutely. This is going to affect every student who attends college. The legislature does pass some bills that don't affect many Kansans. There are lots of bills that will probably affect less than 0.5% of the people of Kansas. This bill will affect every single female high school athlete, either in high school or in college in Kansas. It will affect every single person who attends college in the state of Kansas. And it indirectly affects those families, because I can certainly tell you that if any of my girls are competing in sports against boys, that is going to make me very unhappy. And I think many other parents would feel the same way when their kids train day after day after day, and then are denied a scholarship opportunity or denied a place at the grandstand at the end of the race because they were displaced. So, contrary to most laws that are passed in any given legislative session, this one affects the vast majority of Kansans. I think if you look at a typical law, maybe affect 1%, might affect 5% or 10%. This one affects the majority of Kansans. And so I disagree with Governor Kelly's suggestion that this is a law that we need not be concerned with because it doesn't affect many people. On the contrary, this is a law that affects almost everyone.
And I know you said when girls are playing against boys. What do you mean by that? I mean, would you classify that as a transgender woman playing against another female? Or?
No, I wouldn't, because and I think there are thousands of pages of information and evidence that have been put out there about the effects of taking hormone therapy and undergoing various transgender treatments. But the bottom line is that they can't change the skeletal structure and other advantages that males gain. And so while it can in some ways, change the amount of testosterone or other hormones in an athlete's body, it cannot change the structure of the body. And that's why so many Americans, recognized this visually when they saw Leah Thomas towering over the competitors that were pushed to second and third place in NCAA swimming. And I think anyone who's competed in sports recognizes that there are certain inherent advantages that are obvious, and that you just taking some chemicals isn't going to, for example, in my daughter's event of cross country, the hormone therapy isn't going to change the fact that the male competitor has longer legs and has a different skeletal structure and has different muscular advantages in running. And similarly in wrestling, which is really astonishing to me that this is being allowed in some competitions already. The notion that a male with the upper body strength and skeletal structure is going to be allowed to compete against a female in that event is just equally outrageous to me. So, I understand they make the argument that by taking these treatments and this hormone therapy that everything changes, and that suddenly they make this transition to becoming a female in every meaningful respect. But I think most Americans recognize that there are still basic biological facts at play.
Are you just counting the transgender identity entirely here? Or?
No, I'm not saying that a person can't change their appearance, change their presentation to other people. They have a right to do that if they want to do that. But they don't have a right to make sports unfair. And that's really what this is about.
I guess the question I would have is sort of, we are talking about a pretty small percentage of student athletes. In your mind, if you had a transgender student who was an athlete and also had aspirations of maybe having a college career in sports, where do they fit in? Because maybe they don't belong in women's sports, or they don't belong in men's sports, but where do they fit in? Where can they compete in your mind?
Well, and that's something I think probably the college sporting associations are the best place to have that debate. One option that is being discussed to some extent is the option of an open category where people of any sex can compete in a particular sport. I think that's certainly one option. But in terms of Title IX is about creating opportunities for females to compete in sports. And, this regulation has the opposite effect. It destroys those opportunities that have been created already.
Talk to us about cancel culture, how it's affected families and girls and women standing up, and what might need to change.
Well, yeah, one of the things that we've seen is that sometimes people who do speak out, and in this case speak out for just reality and sporting reality, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of what effect these hormonal therapies have on a person. Anyone who observes sports and observes the competition by these biological males in female sports has seen the obvious unfairness of it. And so the idea that someone should be punished or should be canceled by simply speaking what they have observed is really disturbing. It's Orwellian, in fact, if someone is canceled or punished simply for saying what they believe. I would never say that a trans individual can't speak out and say what he or she believes about the effect of whatever therapies they've undergone. But everybody else has a right to speak out, and I think all of us who observe or play in athletic events, we have a right to say what we believe about the fairness of that event. And so no one should be canceled for saying anything in America. This used to be a country where anybody could speak their mind, and everybody lived by the view that it's America, you can say what you want, there's open debate, and no one's going to be punished for expressing their beliefs, especially beliefs just about sports or beliefs about politics. All right, well, thank you all for your questions. I appreciate it.